August 29, 1944. Somewhere on the banks of the Seine River, southeast of Paris, Lieutenant General George S. Patton stood at the edge of a map table inside his command post, staring at colored pins stretching across hundreds of miles of French territory. Behind him, staff officers moved with controlled urgency, updating positions, relaying orders. Outside, the rumble of armor echoed through the summer air. Patton's Third Army had just accomplished something military planners said would take a year. They'd done it in 4 weeks. The pins on that map told a story the German High Command couldn't comprehend. 700 miles in 1 month. Wehrmacht units that had held Normandy with fanatic determination were now scattered across the French countryside, abandoning equipment, fleeing toward the German border in whatever vehicles they could find. What began as an orderly withdrawal had collapsed into something else entirely. The German Seventh Army wasn't retreating anymore. It was running. Patton had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. The pursuit, the chase, the complete disintegration of an enemy army caught in the open. And now, watching his armor units race toward Germany's doorstep, he knew exactly what he was witnessing. The Rout. Before we go further, if you're finding this deep dive into military history valuable, hit that like button. It helps more history enthusiasts discover these stories. Now let's understand how Patton turned a breakthrough into a military catastrophe for Nazi Germany. The nightmare before the storm. To understand what Patton said when the German retreat became a rout, you need to grasp what came before. The summer of 1944 had been brutal. After D-Day on June 6th, Allied forces pushed inland from the Normandy beaches into a landscape designed for defense. The bocage country of northern France consisted of ancient hedgerows, thick earthen banks topped with dense vegetation that divided the countryside into small fields. Each hedgerow became a fortified position, each field a killing ground. For 2 months, American, British, and Canadian forces battered themselves against German defenses, progress measured in yards, not miles. The casualty lists grew longer. The timetables slipped further behind schedule. Allied planners had anticipated reaching the Seine River by D-Day plus 90. They were nowhere close. The Germans defended with skill and determination. Panzer divisions, though depleted, struck back at every Allied advance. The Seventh Army under Paul Hauser fought a masterful defensive campaign, trading space for time, bleeding the Allies for every inch of Norman soil. By late July, some Allied commanders wondered if they'd ever break out of Normandy. But George Patton wasn't worried. While First Army and British forces ground through the hedgerows, Patton trained his Third Army for a different kind of warfare: exploitation, pursuit. The kind of mobile operations that military theorists discussed but few armies ever achieved. Third Army wasn't in Normandy yet. It waited for the breakout, coiled like a spring. Patton understood something fundamental about armored warfare. Speed itself became a weapon. If you could move faster than the enemy could think, faster than he could deploy reinforcements, faster than he could establish defensive lines, you didn't need to fight. You could simply bypass strong points, cut supply lines, shatter command and control. The enemy would collapse not from firepower, but from paralysis. The Hammer Falls operation. Cobra launched on July 25th with a devastating aerial bombardment. Over 1,500 heavy bombers dropped nearly 4,000 tons of explosives on a 5-mile-wide strip of German defenses near Saint-Lô. The effect exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had experienced in the West. Entire battalions simply ceased to exist. 2 panzer divisions positioned to counterattack never fired a shot before their formations disintegrated under the bombardment. Through the gap torn in German lines, Lieutenant General Joseph Lawton Collins pushed his 7th Corps forward. Behind them came Troy Middleton's 8th Corps, expanding the breach, rolling up the German flanks. By July 30th, American forces seized Avranches. a crucial road junction at the base of the Cotentin Peninsula. The breakout had succeeded. The bocage warfare was over. And on August 1st, at 1200 hours, Third Army became operational in France. Patton immediately faced a decision that would define the campaign. He needed to push two entire corps through a single corridor at Avranches, 200,000 men, 40,000 vehicles. Through a gap the Germans could close with a single, concentrated counterattack. General Omar Bradley, commanding 12th Army Group, called the movement flat impossible. But Patton saw what others couldn't. He'd spent the previous months developing specialized information units. The Army Information Service provided real-time intelligence from forward units, bypassing normal communication channels. The Signal Intelligence Service monitored German radio traffic, protected American communications, and provided early warning of enemy movements. Together, these units gave Patton something priceless in warfare: situational awareness. While German commanders struggled to understand what was happening at Avranches, Patton knew the position and status of every unit moving through that corridor. He could see the traffic flow, identify bottlenecks, reroute columns before jams developed. And critically, he knew the Germans didn't know what he was doing. The crossing succeeded. Two corps, intact and ready to fight, emerged from the Avranches corridor and fanned out into open country. Wade Hyslop's 15th Corps turned southeast. Walton Walker's ex-US Corps drove south toward the Loire River. Middleton's the 8th Corps wheeled west into Brittany. The exploitation had begun. In his diary, Patton scrawled quick notes between operational decisions. His handwriting rushed, often misspelled in his haste to capture thoughts. On August 2nd, he wrote something that revealed his mindset. "We are going so fast. My only worries are my military relations, not my enemies." Read that again. His only worries were his superior officers, not the Wehrmacht. That statement captures everything about what was happening. The German 7th Army was collapsing. Patton could see it in the intelligence reports, in the intercepts his signal intelligence teams decoded, in the reports from forward reconnaissance units. German commanders couldn't establish coherent defensive lines because they didn't know where Third Army was or where it would strike next. The counter-punch that never landed by August 5th. Third Army controlled an operational area stretching from Argentan in Normandy to Orléans on the Loire. Nearly 400 miles in less than 5 days. German forces scattered across that expanse had dissolved into isolated pockets, fragments of units trying to escape encirclement. But Adolf Hitler had other ideas. On August 2nd, sitting in his Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia, the Führer issued orders directly to Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, Commander-in-Chief West. Retake Avranches, cut the American supply lines, destroy Third Army while it was exposed deep in French territory. Hitler committed 8 panzer divisions to the counterattack, stripping his forces around Caen to mass armor for a decisive strike. The attack came before dawn on August 7th. Exelvine Panzer Corps, spearheaded by the 2nd, 1st SS, and 116th Panzer Divisions, drove west from Mortagne toward Avranches. This was the Wehrmacht as it had been in 1940. Concentrated armor, clear objectives, aggressive execution. Except Patton knew it was coming. On the night of August 6th, Major Melvin Helfers entered Patton's command post carrying Ultra decrypts. Ultra, the Allies' greatest intelligence advantage, had broken German military codes. The intercepts revealed Hitler's entire plan, every division involved, the axis of attack, the objectives. Patton read the intelligence and made his assessment. He told his staff he thought it was a bluff, that the Germans were actually preparing a withdrawal. But he didn't gamble on that assumption. He positioned forces to contain any breakthrough. The 80th Infantry Division, French 2nd Armored Division, and 35th Infantry Division moved to Saint-Hilaire, positioned to block any German drive toward Avranches. The Mortain counterattack smashed into American positions held by the 30th Infantry Division. Bitter fighting erupted around the town. On a hilltop east of Mortain, an American battalion found itself surrounded. They held their position, calling in artillery fire on German armor attempting to bypass them. RAF Typhoons screamed overhead, firing rockets at panzer columns. The counterattack stalled, then stopped, then began falling back. For Patton, Mortain wasn't a crisis, it was an opportunity. While von Kluge committed his remaining mobile reserves to an attack toward Avranches, those same forces left their flanks exposed to Third Army's mobile columns. Patton ordered 15th Corps to strike north toward Argentan. If successful, it would close the Falaise pocket, trapping the entire German 7th Army. He could see the complete collapse coming, not retreat, not even defeat. Annihilation. The pursuit. By August 13th, the German situation had become catastrophic. The Mortain counterattack had failed completely. Allied forces were closing the Falaise pocket from north and south. Inside that shrinking perimeter, remnants of 19 German divisions fought desperately to escape. Von Kluge recognized the disaster unfolding. His forces were abandoning their carefully maintained telephone networks, forced to rely on radio communications that American intelligence teams intercepted with ease. Every message the Germans transmitted revealed their positions, their intentions, their desperation. Third Army's 118th Radio Intelligence Company worked around the clock. Direction-finding equipment pinpointed German radio transmitters. Cryptographers broke field codes. The intelligence flowed directly to Patton's headquarters through dedicated channels, bypassing the normal Army bureaucracy that could delay information for hours. On August 14th, the Radio Intelligence Company intercepted transmissions indicating an armored formation attempting to break through Third Army's lines southeast of the Falaise pocket. Direction finders triangulated the position. Patton ordered 15th Corps to block the escape route. American infantry and armor caught the German column in the open. 50 tanks destroyed in a single engagement. This was pursuit warfare as Patton had envisioned it. Not set-piece battles, but continuous harassment of a retreating enemy. Give them no time to rest, no time to reorganize, no time to establish defensive positions. Keep them moving, keep them panicked, keep them collapsing. The German withdrawal became a nightmare of congestion and chaos, roads clogged with vehicles. Artillery pieces abandoned when fuel ran out. Horses shot because they couldn't keep pace. Allied aircraft struck constantly whenever weather permitted, adding to the devastation. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower toured the Falaise battlefield after the pocket closed on August 21st. He described the scene as something only Dante could portray. For hundreds of yards you could walk stepping only on dead and decaying flesh. Approximately 50,000 Germans were killed or captured inside the pocket. Another 20,000 escaped, but they left behind virtually all their equipment. 500 tanks and assault guns littered the killing ground. The material loss alone would have crippled German operations in France. But the human cost ran deeper. Unit cohesion shattered. Officers lost control of their formations. Soldiers who survived the pocket emerged traumatized, their will to fight severely degraded. For the German army in the West, Falaise marked the transition from retreat to rout. Racing the map Third Army didn't pause. Bradley wanted Patton to close the Falaise gap completely, to seal every German inside. Patton's units pushed to Argentan, reaching the boundary between American and British operational areas. Then Montgomery, still nominally commanding all ground forces, ordered Patton to halt. The gap remained open for 10 days while German forces streamed through. Patton was furious. He could see the complete destruction of Army Group B within reach. But Bradley backed Montgomery's decision, concerned that Patton's forces might collide with Canadian and Polish units closing from the north. So Patton turned his attention east. If he couldn't trap the Germans at Falaise, he'd race them to the Seine, then the Moselle, then the German border itself. The pursuit accelerated. Third Army's armored divisions operated at the extreme limits of mobile warfare. Reconnaissance units ranged 50 miles ahead of the main columns, seeking German formations, identifying routes, seizing bridges before defenders could demolish them. When reconnaissance found the enemy, armor and mechanized infantry attacked immediately, giving the Germans no time to establish defensive positions. Patton had developed a tactical air support system more sophisticated than any other Allied army. Third Army headquarters maintained dedicated staff for coordinating with fighter-bomber squadrons. Pilots received target information within minutes of ground units identifying enemy concentrations. The aircraft struck while the Germans were still organizing their defenses. Light aircraft, normally used for artillery spotting, took over reconnaissance missions because the advance moved too fast for normal intelligence gathering. Motorcycle couriers raced between forward units and Army headquarters because radio communications couldn't keep pace with the operational tempo. The distances involved in Third Army's operations created command and control challenges unlike anything in the European theater. By mid-August, Third Army was responsible for a front stretching from Argentan in Normandy to Orléans on the Loire to positions along the Seine, southeast of Paris. Individual corps operated over 100 miles from Army headquarters, yet Patton maintained his information advantage. The Army Information Service ran relay stations to pass messages when radio communications failed. Liaison officers embedded with divisions reported directly to Third Army headquarters, bypassing corps-level bureaucracy. Patton knew what was happening across that enormous operational area in near real time. The Germans couldn't match that awareness. Their situation reports arrived hours late, if at all. Unit commanders lost contact with higher headquarters. The carefully structured German command system, so effective in defensive operations, collapsed under the chaos of pursuit. On August 21st, elements of Third Army's 3e and 4e Corps crossed the Seine at multiple points south of Paris. German defenders couldn't mass forces to contain the bridgeheads because they didn't know which crossings represented the main American effort. By the time German commanders identified the threat and attempted to counterattack, American engineers had constructed bridges capable of supporting armor. Third Army poured across the Seine. The last major natural barrier between Normandy and the German border was behind them. Ahead lay 500 miles of increasingly open terrain, perfect country for armored exploitation. The words that mattered. So what did Patton say when he realized the German retreat had become a rout? The historical record preserves several statements that capture his mindset during those August days. Beyond the operational reports and situation maps, Patton's actual words reveal how he understood what Third Army was accomplishing. "We are going so fast. My only worries are my military relations, not my enemies." He wrote that in early August, when the pursuit was just beginning. It wasn't bravado. It was tactical assessment. The Wehrmacht in France had lost the ability to threaten Third Army's operations. Patton's genuine concern was that Bradley or Montgomery would halt the advance for reasons having nothing to do with the military situation. "If I can keep going," he wrote, "I will be quite a fellow." There's revealing honesty in that statement. Patton understood he was accomplishing something extraordinary, something that would define his reputation and his place in military history. 700 miles in 30 days, 500,000 German casualties, the destruction of Army Group B as an effective fighting force. But the quote that perhaps best captures Patton's understanding of pursuit warfare came on September 2nd, when fuel shortages finally forced Third Army to halt on the approaches to the German border. By then, Third Army had outrun its supply lines. Trucks couldn't haul enough gasoline from Normandy to keep the armor moving. The famous Red Ball Express, a continuous convoy system, operated around the clock, but couldn't meet the enormous fuel requirements of sustained mobile operations. Patton said, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks gotta have gas." That statement reveals Patton's operational philosophy. Infantry could survive on reduced rations. Men could go hungry for days if necessary. But armored divisions without fuel ceased to be combat units. They became stationary targets. The entire concept of pursuit warfare depended on maintaining momentum, and momentum required fuel. The logistics failure that stopped Third Army in early September represented one of the great missed opportunities of the war. Patton believed he could have reached the German border by mid-August if fuel supplies had been maintained. The Siegfried Line defenses stood unmanned in late August. German units streaming back from France needed weeks to reorganize and rearm. Instead, Third Army sat stationary from August 31st to September 5th, while logistics units accumulated fuel supplies. Those 5 days gave German Army Group G time to establish defensive positions along the Moselle River. When Third Army resumed operations, it faced prepared defenses instead of the chaotic retreat it had pursued across France. The information advantage that Patton had exploited so effectively began to erode. German forces shortened their supply lines. Communication systems stabilized. The Wehrmacht's decision-making cycle, disrupted for weeks by Third Army's relentless pressure, began to catch up. The human cost of pursuit lost in the operational statistics and the strategic significance is the experience of the soldiers who conducted this remarkable campaign. Third Army's advance across France wasn't a peaceful procession through liberated territory. German rear guards fought vicious, delaying actions. Snipers picked off unwary Americans in supposedly cleared towns. Desperate Wehrmacht units launched local counterattacks. American casualties during the pursuit, though lighter than the hedgerow fighting, remained significant. Tank crews operated with minimal sleep, driving their vehicles to mechanical failure, then transferring to replacement tanks and continuing the advance. Infantry rode on armored vehicles, exposed to enemy fire, racing to keep pace with the exploitation. The French civilians caught in the path of this campaign experienced both liberation and devastation. Allied aircraft struck German columns without precision weapons, and their bombs often hit French towns. Artillery bombardments targeting retreating Wehrmacht units destroyed villages. The civilian casualties never made their way into the operational summaries, but they numbered in the thousands. For the Germans, the pursuit across France became a traumatic experience that broke the Wehrmacht's cohesion in the West. Soldiers who survived Normandy, Falaise, and the race to the Seine arrived at the German border exhausted, their units decimated, their equipment abandoned across hundreds of miles of French territory. Field Marshal von Kluge never made it back to Germany. On August 17th, Hitler relieved him of command, suspicious of Kluge's communications with the July 20th plotters who attempted to assassinate the Führer. Field Marshal Walter Model arrived to take command of the catastrophe. Kluge knew his fate. On August 18th, while traveling back to Germany, he stopped his staff car along a roadside in France. He wrote a final letter to Hitler, pleading with the dictator to end the war before Germany was completely destroyed. Then, Kluge took poison. The letter never changed Hitler's mind, but it stands as testimony to how completely the German position in France had collapsed. A field marshal, veteran of the Eastern Front and the Western defenses, saw no alternative to ending his own life rather than face the consequences of a military disaster he couldn't prevent. The racing stop Third Army's pursuit finally halted in early September, not because of German resistance, but because of mathematics. The trucks hauling supplies from Normandy beaches consumed nearly as much fuel as they delivered. The distances had become too great for the logistical system designed to support operations near the invasion beaches. Patton's final offensive action before the fuel ran out came on August 27th. Tostin. Corps' 4th Armored Division seized Troyes 80 miles southeast of Paris, routing the German garrison. Sixth Corps captured Nogent the same day. Third Army stood 70 miles from the German border, having advanced over 700 miles in 30 days. Then the tanks stopped. Fuel gauges read empty. Supply columns were still 2 days behind the forward units. Bradley allocated the limited available fuel to Montgomery's 21st Army Group for an offensive in the north. Third Army remained stationary, its mobility advantage neutralized by logistics rather than enemy action. When operations resumed on September 5th, the situation had fundamentally changed. German Army Group G had established defensive positions along the Moselle River. The Siegfried Line fortifications, empty and unmanned in late August, now held German units withdrawn from France and reinforced from the interior. The pursuit was over. The next phase would be conventional offensive operations against prepared defenses. Third Army would fight through the fall and winter of 1944 in Lorraine, battering against German fortifications at Metz, grinding forward through mud and snow. The rapid exploitation that characterized August gave way to the attritional warfare that defined the approach to Germany. Patton would experience his greatest frustration in those months, watching his mobile units reduced to infantry assaults against bunkers. The opportunity that existed in late August never returned. The question of what might have happened if Third Army had maintained its fuel supply remains one of the great what-ifs of the European theater. Some historians argue that the war could have ended in 1944 if Patton had reached the Rhine before German defenses solidified. Others contend that supply lines were already overstretched and that pause was inevitable regardless of fuel allocation. The nature of rout military theorists distinguish between retreat and rout. Retreat is a controlled operation. Units withdraw in order, maintaining cohesion, establishing successive defensive lines. Rear guards delay the enemy while main forces reposition. Communications remain intact. Commanders retain control. Rout is the complete breakdown of military organization. Units disintegrate. Soldiers flee as individuals rather than formations. Equipment is abandoned. The chain of command collapses. Panic spreads faster than any tactical situation would justify. What Third Army witnessed across France in August 1944 was the Wehrmacht transitioning from retreat to rout. That transition didn't happen everywhere simultaneously. Some German units maintained discipline and fighting effectiveness throughout the withdrawal. Others dissolved completely. The difference often came down to leadership and unit cohesion. Elite formations like the 2nd SS Panzer Division, though severely depleted, maintained their organizational structure and conducted effective rearguard actions. Newer units, conscripts, and replacements thrown together without adequate training broke under pressure. Patton's genius lay in identifying and exploiting the formations that were breaking. His intelligence network gave him the situational awareness to distinguish between German units capable of resistance and those on the edge of collapse. He directed his armor against the weak points, creating cascading failures in the German defensive system. Each successful penetration accelerated the next. German commanders, uncertain of American positions and capabilities, made decisions based on outdated or incomplete information. They committed reserves to threats that no longer existed. They delayed withdrawals until escape routes were already cut. The cumulative effect of these command failures was organizational paralysis. Third Army didn't defeat the Wehrmacht through superior firepower. American and German tanks were roughly equivalent in capability. German anti-tank weapons remained effective throughout the campaign. What Third Army achieved was a tempo of operations that prevented German commanders from making coherent decisions. Patton got inside the enemy's decision-making cycle and stayed there. In military terminology, this is called achieving and maintaining the initiative. Patton formulated his understanding of this concept before the invasion, writing in notes that would guide Third Army's operations. First surprise, find out what the enemy intends to do and do it first. Second, rock the enemy back on his heels. Keep him rocking. Never give him a chance to get his balance or build up. Third, relentless pursuit, à l'outrance, as the French say, beyond the limit. Fourth, mop him up. That four-step process describes exactly what happened in France during August 1944. Ultra-intelligence allowed Patton to act first at Mortagne. The rapid exploitation after the Falaise pocket kept the Germans from establishing defensive lines. The relentless pursuit across the Seine and toward the Moselle prevented German Army Group G from reorganizing. The final step, mopping up, would have happened if fuel supplies had been maintained. The legacy of August Third Army's pursuit across France in August 1944 remains one of the most remarkable operational achievements in military history. The statistics alone tell an extraordinary story. 700 miles in 30 days, 500,000 German casualties, the destruction of Army Group B's combat power, the liberation of Paris and most of northern France. But numbers don't capture the significance of what Patton accomplished. He demonstrated that mobile warfare could succeed against a peer adversary. The Germans had perfected blitzkrieg in 1940, combining armor, mechanized infantry, and tactical air support to achieve operational breakthroughs. Patton showed that the Allies could match and exceed German mobile operations. The techniques Third Army developed became doctrine. The emphasis on rapid, reliable communications, the integration of tactical air support with ground operations, the use of specialized reconnaissance units ranging far ahead of main forces, the aggressive exploitation of intelligence to maintain situational awareness. Perhaps most significantly, Patton proved that information dominance could be as decisive as material superiority. Third Army didn't always have more tanks than the Germans. It didn't have better weapons. What it possessed was better information about enemy positions, intentions, and capabilities. That information advantage, properly exploited, allowed Patton to concentrate forces at decisive points while economizing elsewhere. The pursuit also revealed the limits of mobile warfare. Logistics matter. Supply lines stretch. Mechanized units consume fuel at rates that eventually exceed any transportation system's capacity to deliver. The operational pause forced on Third Army in early September demonstrated that even the most successful exploitation must eventually culminate when physical constraints overcome tactical success. For Patton personally, August 1944 represented the fulfillment of his military philosophy. He'd spent his career studying mobile warfare, writing about it, training for it. Now he'd executed it at the operational level against one of history's most formidable armies. The diary entry where he wrote, "I will be quite a fellow," reveals his awareness that he was achieving something that would define his legacy. Yet Patton's greatest frustration came from knowing what might have been. If Bradley had allowed him to close the Falaise Gap completely, the German 7th Army would have been entirely destroyed. If fuel supplies had been maintained through early September, Third Army likely would have reached the Rhine before German defenses solidified. The strategic opportunity that existed in late August never returned. The German army in the West would fight on for 9 more months. Third Army would participate in the Battle of the Bulge, cross the Rhine, drive deep into Germany, and end the war in Czechoslovakia. But the operational conditions of August, the complete fluidity that allowed for rapid exploitation, never materialized again. For the German soldiers who survived the pursuit across France, the experience left psychological scars as deep as the physical devastation. They'd witnessed their supposedly invincible Wehrmacht torn apart by American mobile operations. The myth of German tactical superiority, cultivated through 5 years of victories, shattered in those August weeks. When these soldiers reached the German border, they carried with them the knowledge that the war was lost. Some would continue fighting out of discipline or ideology. Others recognized the futility but lacked any alternative. The German defense of the West for the remainder of the war became increasingly desperate, driven not by hope of victory, but by fear of consequences. The price of genius. Understanding Patton's achievement in August 1944 requires acknowledging both his brilliance and his limitations. His aggressive exploitation of operational opportunities was masterful. His ability to maintain information advantage through specialized units and aggressive intelligence collection was ahead of his time. But Patton also displayed the flaws that would eventually lead to his relief from command. His insubordination toward Bradley and Montgomery, barely concealed in his diary entries, created friction with the Allied High Command. His willingness to ignore boundaries and orders when he thought he saw an opportunity, as at Argentan, caused strategic complications. His treatment of subordinates could be harsh. His demands for relentless offensive action placed enormous strain on Third Army soldiers who fought with minimal rest through the entire August campaign. Tank crews operated vehicles until mechanical failure, then immediately transferred to replacements and continued advancing. Infantry units conducted forced marches to keep pace with armor, fighting while exhausted. Patton's famous profanity-laced speeches motivated some soldiers and alienated others. His philosophy of aggressive action, of never digging in but always attacking, cost lives that more cautious tactics might have saved, but it also achieved results that more cautious commanders never would have accomplished. The controversy surrounding Patton persists because he embodied contradictions. He was a careful planner who appeared recklessly aggressive. He was a military intellectual who presented himself as a profane warrior. He was a student of history who seemed to ignore logistics. He demanded absolute discipline, but routinely violated orders he disagreed with. In August 1944, those contradictions worked. His aggressive exploitation succeeded because he combined it with careful intelligence preparation. His willingness to take risks paid off, because those risks were calculated based on superior situational awareness. His violation of boundaries and orders achieved results that justified the insubordination, at least in the immediate tactical sense. Later in the war, the contradictions would become more problematic. The Task Force bomb raid, where Patton sent an undersized unit deep behind enemy lines, partly to rescue his son-in-law, would damage his reputation. His statements about the Soviet Union and his administration of occupied Germany would lead to his relief from command. But in August 1944, Patton was exactly what the situation required, a commander willing to exploit success ruthlessly. An operational artist who could see possibilities that more conventional thinkers missed. A leader who could inspire soldiers to achieve things they didn't think possible. The moment when everything changed. If we return to the original question, what did Patton say when he realized the German retreat was becoming a rout? The answer lies not in a single dramatic quotation, but in the cumulative record of his statements during that extraordinary August. "We are going so fast. My only worries are my military relations, not my enemies," captures his early recognition that the Wehrmacht had lost its ability to threaten Third Army's operations. "I will be quite a fellow" reveals his awareness that he was accomplishing something historically significant. "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks got to have gas," demonstrates his understanding that the pursuit success depended on maintaining mobility. These statements, scattered through diary entries and staff discussions, paint a picture of a commander who recognized the opportunity unfolding before him and the factors that could limit its exploitation. Patton understood he was witnessing and creating a rout. He knew the Germans were collapsing. He could see, through his superior intelligence network, the disintegration of Wehrmacht command and control. What frustrated him was that he also saw the constraints preventing complete exploitation of that collapse. Bradley's caution at Falaise, Montgomery's boundary restrictions, the logistical limitations that would eventually force Third Army to halt. The historical record suggests that Patton's most profound statements during this period were written, not spoken. His diary entries, hastily scrawled between operational decisions, reveal a commander acutely aware that he was accomplishing something extraordinary while simultaneously being prevented from achieving everything he thought possible. On August 19th, he wrote, "I am convinced that the best end for an officer is the last bullet of the war." That dark sentiment reveals the intensity of his focus. He was driving himself and Third Army to the absolute limit, and he understood the costs. The German retreat became a rout not at a single moment but across the entire August campaign. It happened at Falaise when Wehrmacht units abandoned equipment and fled in panic. It happened at the Seine when German defenders couldn't organize coherent resistance to American river crossings. It happened on the roads of France when retreating German columns dissolved under constant pressure from Third Army's pursuit. Patton recognized what was happening as it unfolded. His statements throughout August reveal a commander confident in his operations, frustrated by constraints, and aware that he was participating in something historically significant. He didn't need a dramatic proclamation at a single decisive moment. His entire conduct of operations spoke louder than any quotation could. The pursuit across France in August 1944 demonstrated what mobile warfare could achieve when properly executed. It showed the decisive advantage that information dominance provides. It revealed the limitations of even the most successful operations when logistics fail. And it established Patton's reputation as one of history's great practitioners of pursuit warfare. When Third Army finally stopped in early September, it had traveled further and faster than any Allied army in the European theater. The German retreat had become a rout, not through a single battle, but through relentless pressure that never allowed the Wehrmacht to recover its balance. That was Patton's achievement, and his words throughout those August weeks reveal his understanding of what Third Army was accomplishing. The rout ended when the fuel ran out. But for one extraordinary month, Third Army demonstrated what American mobile warfare could achieve: 700 miles, 30 days. The destruction of Army Group B, the liberation of France. And Patton, writing in his diary between operational decisions, understanding exactly what it meant.